The termination letter sat on my desk like a coiled snake. 3 sentences. 42 words. 7 years of my life reduced to corporate euphemisms about organizational restructuring and strategic realignment. I read it twice, not because I didn't understand but because I wanted to memorize the exact moment Andrew Briggs made the worst miscalculation of his career. 7 years. That's how long I've been the heartbeat of Vexel Solutions. 7 years of late nights when the servers crashed and everyone else had gone home. 7 years of turning failing projects into success stories that landed on Forbes lists with other people's names attached. 7 years of being the invisible architect while others collected applause. What Andrew doesn't know, what nobody in this steel and glass fortress knows except my attorney, is that when Vexel stood at the edge of bankruptcy 3 years ago, I didn't just watch from the sidelines. I dove in headfirst with everything I had. The night our then CEO begged for emergency funding to prevent liquidation, I liquidated my own safety net instead. My father left me a substantial inheritance when he passed. Money he'd earned building telecommunications infrastructure across 3 continents. Money that was supposed to be my security, my freedom, my future. I wired every dollar of it into Vexel's dying accounts. In exchange, my attorney structured a deal that gave me 48% ownership through a deliberately obscure entity called Clearwater Capital Holdings. Not quite majority but close enough to matter when votes are counted. No press releases. No corner office upgrade. No nameplate on the door. Just survival. And the quiet knowledge that this company beating in my chest like a second heart was now partially mine to protect. Then Andrew Briggs arrived 6 months ago like a hurricane in a tailored suit. If you're new here and enjoying these powerful stories, make sure to hit that subscribe button and stay tuned for more. Let me know in the comments what part of today's story touched you most. He came with credentials that read like propaganda. Harvard Business School, 3 successful turnarounds, a TED Talk about disrupting legacy mindsets, that went viral among business bros who mistake ruthlessness for innovation. The board hired him with champagne and promises. They wanted a savior. They got a wrecking ball. From his first all-hands meeting, Andrew made his philosophy crystal clear. Vexel was bloated with dead weight and shackled by outdated thinking. His eyes swept the room like a farmer surveying crops to burn. I stood in the back row, watching him the way you watch a storm forming on the horizon, with the certain knowledge that destruction is coming, but not yet knowing where it will strike. He spoke in that particular dialect of modern executive. All verbs, no substance. Pivoting. Optimizing. Streamlining. Each word a polite euphemism for the blood he planned to spill. I should have known I'd be on his list. Women like me always are. We do the work that matters but don't perform in the ways men like Andrew understand. We don't dominate meetings with the loudest voice. We don't golf with board members or swap war stories over bourbon. We simply make things work, quietly, persistently, invisibly. And invisible things are easy to eliminate. The first cut came 3 weeks into his tenure. He eliminated my entire project management division, scattering my team across departments like seeds in a storm. When I objected in a leadership meeting, politely with data supporting why this would create chaos, he smiled at me with all the warmth of a snake evaluating a mouse. "Isabella," he said, my name in his mouth like something distasteful. "I appreciate your passion, but passion isn't strategy. We need leaders who can see the bigger picture." The implication hung in the air. I was small-minded, emotional, limited. Several people in that room knew I'd personally saved projects that kept Vexel afloat. None of them said a word. Silence is how systems like this survive. The second cut was more personal. Andrew reassigned the Helix project. My project, the one I'd built from concept to near completion over 18 months, to one of his imported executives. A man named Colin Fletcher who had never written a line of code or managed a technical team in his life, but who had gone to business school with Andrew and knew how to laugh at the right jokes. "We need fresh eyes," Andrew told me in his office, not quite meeting my gaze. "You understand." I understood perfectly. This wasn't about fresh eyes. This was about erasing me piece by piece until nothing remained but a name on outdated documentation. I documented everything. Every reassignment, every meeting I was suddenly excluded from, every project stripped away with bureaucratic efficiency. I created folders with timestamps and saved emails that would later become evidence. Not out of paranoia but out of experience. I'd watched this pattern before with other women in tech, other competent people deemed inconvenient. The game was rigged, but I'd learned long ago that rigged games can still be won if you understand the rules better than those who made them. 3 days ago, Andrew summoned me to his corner office. The city sprawled below us, all glass towers and afternoon light that made everything look cleaner than it was. He sat behind his massive desk, imported mahogany. I'd heard him brag about it, with his fingers steepled like a villain from central casting. "Isabella, let's not dance around this," he began, voice carrying that false warmth executives use when delivering bad news. "You're a talented individual, but your skill set doesn't align with where we're taking Vexel." Talented individual. The phrase men use when they mean, you're competent enough that I can't claim incompetence, but not important enough for me to care about keeping you. "I see," I said, my voice steady as glass. "And where exactly are we taking Vexel?" His expression flickered, annoyance at being questioned perhaps, or surprise that I wasn't crumbling. "Into the future. Which requires people who can adapt, who can think beyond their comfort zones." The subtext was clear. I was old guard, outdated, an obstacle to his vision. Never mind that his vision so far had consisted of firing experienced people and replacing them with expensive consultants who knew nothing about our systems. "I've adapted through 3 major platform migrations and 2 complete infrastructure overhauls," I replied quietly. "I'd be happy to discuss what comfort zones I'm allegedly trapped in." Andrew's smile turned sharp. "This isn't a negotiation, Isabella. We're offering you a generous severance package. 6 months salary, benefits continuation, a neutral reference. I suggest you take it." The room felt smaller suddenly, as if the walls were contracting. 6 months salary. For 7 years of keeping this company alive. 4 18-month projects completed under budget. For every weekend I'd sacrificed, every relationship that withered because I was always at the office solving someone else's crisis. "And if I don't?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Andrew leaned back in his chair, utterly comfortable in his power. "Then we'll make this difficult for everyone. Performance improvement plans, documentation of failures, a much less generous exit. Your choice, but I think we both know which path is smarter." There was the threat dressed up as advice. Accept humiliation with grace, or be publicly destroyed on my way out the door. I stood slowly, smoothing my jacket with deliberate calm. "I'll need to review the severance terms with my attorney." "Of course," Andrew said, already looking at his computer screen, dismissing me like I'd ceased to exist. "Take the weekend." "But Isabella." He glanced up one final time. "Don't make this messier than it needs to be." I walked out of his office with my spine straight and my face composed. I didn't let the tremor in my hands show until I was alone in the elevator, descending through 30 floors of steel and ambition. He thought he'd won. He thought I was neutralized, packaged up neatly for disposal. Andrew Briggs had no idea that the woman he just fired owned nearly half the company he thought he controlled. The weekend passed in a strange calm. I didn't rage or spiral. Instead, I sat in my apartment with my attorney, Lydia Frost, spreading documents across my dining table like we were planning a military campaign. "He actually handed you a termination letter without checking the shareholder registry," Lydia said, shaking her head with something between disbelief and admiration. "That's either breathtaking arrogance or staggering incompetence." "Both," I replied, scanning through the severance agreement Andrew's legal team had sent over. It was designed to look generous while binding me to non-compete clauses that would effectively blacklist me from the industry. "He assumes his authority is absolute." Lydia tapped her pen against the table. "Technically, as CEO, he has operational authority to make personnel decisions. But terminating a major shareholder without board approval." She smiled coldly. "That's going to be a problem for him." "What's our timeline?" I asked. "Emergency board meeting can be called with 48 hours notice if requested by a shareholder holding more than 20%. You've got 48% through Clearwater." Lydia's eyes gleamed. "You can trigger a meeting for Wednesday. 3 days away. 3 days for Andrew to feel secure in his victory while I prepared the ground beneath him to collapse." "Do it," I said. "And Lydia? I want every board member to receive documentation in advance. Every project I've completed, every success metric, every email where Andrew systematically dismantled functional teams. Make it impossible for them to claim ignorance." She nodded, already typing notes. This is going to detonate his credibility. Good, I replied softly. He wanted to make things difficult. Let's show him what difficult actually looks like. Monday morning arrived with cruel sunshine. I returned to Vexel's offices knowing it would likely be my last week, but refusing to slink away quietly. The building rose above the financial district like a monument to ambition. All chrome edges and reflective glass, the kind of architecture that says, success in a language only money speaks. Security waved me through without a second glance. My badge still worked, my access not yet revoked. Small mercies from a termination process Andrew probably hadn't bothered to execute properly yet. I rode the elevator to the 23rd floor where my team, what remained of it, clustered in an open workspace that Andrew had mandated. He claimed open floor plans fostered collaboration. What they actually fostered was noise, distraction, and the inability to have a private conversation. Emma Torres spotted me first. She'd been my lead developer for 4 years, one of the sharpest engineers I'd ever worked with, and someone who'd survived Andrew's culling by keeping her head down and her opinions silent. Isabella, she said, surprise and something like relief crossing her face. We all heard, that I'm out. I finished setting my bag down at my desk. Not quite yet. I've got a few days. Around us, other team members glanced over. Some sympathetic, others carefully neutral. In corporate environments, associating with the condemned can be dangerous. I didn't blame them for their caution. This is wrong, Emma said quietly, anger threading through her voice. You built half of what's keeping this place running. Apparently that's not enough anymore, I replied with a tight smile. But I'm not going anywhere without finishing what I started. Is the Helix documentation up to date? Emma nodded. I've been maintaining it since Colin took over. Though between you and me he hasn't touched it. Just delegates everything and takes credit in meetings. Of course he did. Men like Colin didn't need to understand the work. They just needed to own it long enough to put it on their resumes. I spent Monday organizing transition documents with meticulous care. Not because I believed anyone would use them, but because I wanted a record. Every process I'd developed, every system architecture decision, every contact at client companies. If Vexel was going to push me out, they'd do it knowing exactly what they were losing. Around noon, Andrew's assistant appeared at my desk. Young, nervous, clearly uncomfortable with the errand she'd been sent on. Mr. Briggs would like your access credentials and company devices by end of day, she said, not meeting my eyes. Security will escort you out at 5. So that was his play. Speed up the timeline, get me out before I could cause problems. He must have sensed something, some instinct warning him that I wasn't folding as quietly as he'd expected. I'll need to coordinate with IT for proper handoffs, I said calmly. Security protocols require transition documentation for all system access. That will take more than a few hours. The assistant looked pained. Mr. Briggs said. Mr. Briggs can speak to me directly if he has concerns about security compliance, I interrupted, keeping my voice professional but firm. I'm not walking out of here leaving critical systems vulnerable because he wants a dramatic exit. She retreated, clearly unwilling to push further. 20 minutes later my phone rang. Andrew's name on the screen. Isabella, he said when I answered, voice tight with irritation. I'm told you're complicating your departure. I'm ensuring it's done properly, I corrected. Unless you'd prefer I just delete all my credentials without documentation? I'm sure the SEC would love to hear how Vexel handles data security during personnel transitions. Silence on the other end. The SEC reference hit its mark. Regulators had been scrutinizing tech companies lately, and the last thing Andrew needed was attention on sloppy security practices. Fine, he bid out. You have until Wednesday. But Isabella? Don't test me further. Understood, I said and ended the call. Wednesday. Perfect. The same day as the emergency board meeting he didn't yet know was coming. That afternoon, I received an email from Lydia. Subject line, confirmed. Emergency board session scheduled for Wednesday 2 p.m. All materials distributed. Board counsel has been notified of potential governance issues requiring immediate attention. Several members have already responded with, let's call them pointed questions about recent operational decisions. I read it twice, letting satisfaction curl through my chest like smoke. The pieces were moving into position. Tuesday crawled by with agonizing slowness. I came into the office early before most of the staff arrived and made copies of everything I might need. Not company secrets, I wasn't interested in theft, but my own work product, my own contributions, documentation that proved my value. Andrew was in meetings all day, probably strategizing his next moves. I saw him once striding through the office with Colin and another executive, all of them laughing about something. They looked like conquerors surveying freshly seized territory. Let them celebrate. They'd earned it, this one last day of feeling invincible. By Tuesday evening I'd said quiet goodbyes to the few colleagues I trusted. Emma hugged me fiercely in the parking garage, away from corporate cameras. "Whatever you're planning," she whispered, "I hope it hurts him." "It will," I promised. Wednesday morning arrived cold and clear. I dressed carefully. Charcoal suit, minimal jewelry, hair pulled back in the severe bun I usually avoided because it made me look, in Andrew's words, unapproachable. Today, unapproachable was exactly the message I wanted to send. The board meeting was scheduled for 2 p.m. in the executive conference room on the 35th floor. A space I'd only been in twice before, both times presenting project updates to people who barely looked up from their phones. I arrived at 1:45, passing through security with my visitor badge since my employee access had finally been revoked that morning. The receptionist looked at me with something like pity, clearly aware I was on my way out. "Conference room C," she said softly. "They're expecting you." The elevator rose smooth and silent. My reflection in the polished doors showed a woman who looked far calmer than she felt. My heart beat steady but insistent, adrenaline sharpening every sense. The 35th floor was quieter than the working floors below. All plush carpet and original art, the kind of wealth that whispers instead of shouts. Conference room C sat at the end of a long hallway, floor-to-ceiling windows offering views of the city sprawling toward distant mountains. Through the glass walls I could see them gathering. The board of Vexel Solutions. 9 people who collectively held the power to build or destroy careers with a single vote. And Andrew, of course. Standing at the head of the table in his element, looking confident and controlled. He glanced up as I approached and something flickered across his face. Surprise, then irritation, then calculation. He hadn't expected me to attend. Perhaps he thought I'd take my termination quietly, accept defeat with grace. I opened the door. "Good afternoon," I said, my voice carrying clearly across the room. "Thank you all for making time on short notice." Andrew's jaw tightened. "Isabella, I wasn't aware you'd be joining us." "Really?" I kept my expression neutral, setting my portfolio on the table. "How strange. I'm the one who called this meeting." The silence that followed was exquisite. The board members exchanged glances, some confused, others suddenly alert. Catherine Wu, the longest-serving member and former CFO of a Fortune 500, leaned forward with interest. "I'm sorry," Andrew said, his voice harder now. "You called this meeting?" "As is my right under company bylaws," I replied calmly, taking a seat near the middle of the table rather than at the end where subordinates usually sit. "Any shareholder holding 20% or more can request an emergency session with 48 hours notice. I hold 48% through Clearwater Capital Holdings, so here we are." The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Andrew's face went through several expressions in rapid succession: confusion, disbelief, then something ugly that he quickly masked. I wasn't informed." "The shareholder registry is public record," Catherine Wu said, her tablet already open, fingers moving across the screen. "At least to board members. Clearwater Capital Holdings. Yes, here it is. 48% acquired 3 years ago during the emergency refinancing." Her eyes lifted to me, reassessing. "You funded the rescue package." "I did," I confirmed. "When Vexel was 72 hours from bankruptcy, I liquidated my personal assets and wired emergency capital to keep us operational. In exchange, my attorney structured an ownership stake through a holding company. We kept it quiet because the company needed stability, not questions about new power dynamics." Around the table, board members were pulling up documents on their tablets, verifying what I'd said. Andrew stood frozen at the head of the table, his carefully constructed authority crumbling in real time. "This is highly irregular," he managed, though his voice had lost its commanding edge. "Major shareholders should be disclosed to executive leadership." "Should they?" I asked mildly. I wasn't aware CEOs were entitled to know every detail of corporate ownership. But perhaps you're right. Perhaps if you'd done your due diligence, you wouldn't have made certain operational decisions. I opened my portfolio and began distributing bound documents to each board member. What you're holding is a comprehensive analysis of Vexel's performance over the past 6 months. Since Andrew's arrival, specifically. Andrew moved toward me, hand extended. You can't just. Sit down, Mr. Briggs, Catherine Wu said, her voice cold steel. If a major shareholder has called an emergency meeting, we're going to hear what she has to say. He sat. But his eyes on me were pure venom. I stood, smoothing my jacket, and began. Page 3 shows our employee retention metrics. Since Andrew's arrival, we've lost 32% of our technical staff, our highest attrition rate in company history. Page 7 details the Helix project, which was 94% complete when I was removed as lead and reassigned to Colin Fletcher. It's now stalled at 94% because Mr. Fletcher lacks the technical expertise to complete it. I turned a page, meeting each board member's eyes in turn. Page 12 documents the systematic dismantling of functional project management structures, replaced with what Andrew calls agile leadership pods, which in practice means no accountability and constant confusion about decision-making authority. This is cherry-picked data, Andrew interjected, his face flushed. Restructuring always causes temporary disruption. Page 18, I continued, not acknowledging him, shows client satisfaction scores. Down 19% quarter-over-quarter. We're bleeding relationships we've maintained for years because Andrew's fresh perspective includes ignoring institutional knowledge about what those clients actually need. The board members were reading now, flipping through pages with increasingly serious expressions. Raymond Chin. No, I couldn't use that surname. Raymond Foster, our newest board member and a venture capitalist with stakes in a dozen tech companies, whistled low. These numbers are worse than I realized, he said. Because I've been careful not to alarm the board unnecessarily, Andrew said, recovering some composure. We're in a transition period. Growing pains are normal when you're transforming company culture. And page 24, I said, my voice cutting through his excuses like a blade, documents my termination. Effective immediately for vague reasons about cultural fit and strategic realignment. No performance improvement plan. No documentation of failures. Just a severance package designed to buy my silence and a non-compete agreement intended to blacklist me from the industry. I placed my hands flat on the table, leaning forward slightly. Andrew Briggs fired a major shareholder without checking the shareholder registry. He eliminated the person who saved this company from bankruptcy because she didn't fit his vision of what leadership looks like. And he did it with such confidence that he didn't even consider the possibility of consequences. The silence was absolute. Catherine Wu set down her tablet. Andrew, is this true? Did you terminate Ms. Rhodes without board approval? I have operational authority over personnel decisions, Andrew said, but his voice wavered. That's clearly outlined in my contract. Your contract also requires board notification for any termination of senior leadership, Catherine interrupted. Isabella Rhodes isn't just an employee. She's the head of technical operations and, as we've just learned, our largest individual shareholder. This isn't a personnel decision, it's a governance crisis. I wasn't aware she was a shareholder. Andrew's composure was fully cracked now, desperation creeping in. How was I supposed to know? She never disclosed it. I had no obligation to disclose it, I said quietly. Unlike you, I don't measure my value by titles or office size. I measure it by work done and problems solved. Which is why this company survived its darkest moment, because I believed in it enough to risk everything I had. I turned to face Andrew directly. You called me dead weight. You said my skill set didn't align with the future. You dismantled every structure I built and dismissed 7 years of institutional knowledge because it wasn't wrapped in the right package for you. My voice didn't rise. Didn't need to. But here's what you never understood, Andrew. This company isn't yours to destroy. It's not a line on your resume or a case study for your next TED Talk. It's built on the work of people you never bothered to see, people who kept it running while you played visionary. I picked up my portfolio. I'm not here asking for my job back. I'm here exercising my rights as a shareholder to call for a vote of no confidence in current executive leadership." The room erupted. Andrew shot to his feet, face crimson. "This is a witch hunt. You can't." "I can," I said calmly. "And I am. The bylaws are clear. Any shareholder with over 20% can call for a confidence vote. All in favor?" Catherine Wu's hand went up first. Then Raymond Foster's. One by one, hands rose around the table like a tide coming in. When the count was done, 8 of 9 board members had voted against Andrew Briggs. He stood there frozen, watching his kingdom collapse in real time. "The vote carries," Catherine announced. "Effective immediately, Andrew Briggs is suspended as CEO pending a full investigation into his operational decisions and governance violations." Andrew's mouth opened and closed. For once in his life he had nothing to say. "Security will escort you from the building," Catherine continued, her voice businesslike now. "You'll have 24 hours to retrieve personal items under supervision. All company devices and credentials must be surrendered immediately." 2 security guards appeared at the door. Summoned, I realized, by Catherine before the meeting even started. She'd read my documentation. She'd known this was coming. As they led Andrew toward the door, he turned back to look at me. The hatred in his eyes was pure and absolute. "You'll regret this," he said. "I'll make sure everyone knows what kind of person you really are." "Go ahead," I replied. "Tell them I'm the kind of person who saves sinking companies. Who does the work instead of taking credit. Who knows the difference between actual leadership and performance art. I can live with that reputation." The door closed behind him with a soft click. For a moment no one spoke. Then Catherine Wu turned to me, her expression unreadable. "That was either the bravest thing I've seen in 20 years on corporate boards," she said, "or the most reckless." "Probably both," I admitted. She smiled then, just slightly. "We'll need an interim CEO while we conduct the search for permanent leadership. The board will obviously want to consider internal candidates." Her pause was meaningful. "I assume you'd be interested?" Every eye in the room turned to me. 6 months ago I would have said no. I didn't want the spotlight, didn't want the performance aspect of executive leadership. I just wanted to do good work. But I'd learned something in the past weeks. Silence wasn't safety. Invisibility wasn't protection. Sometimes the only way to preserve what mattered was to step into the light and claim it. "Yes," I said. "I'm interested." Catherine nodded. "Then let's talk terms." The meeting continued for another hour, but the hard part was over. We discussed transition plans, communication strategy, damage control with clients and investors. The board would announce Andrew's suspension citing strategic differences, and position my interim appointment as a return to stability. By the time I left that conference room, the sun was setting over the city, turning the glass towers into pillars of flame. My phone buzzed as I waited for the elevator. "Emma Torres. Is it true?" her text read. "Did you really just get Andrew fired?" I smiled and typed back, "Not fired. Suspended. There's a difference." Her response was immediate, "You're a legend. When can I buy you a drink?" "Soon," I promised. The elevator doors opened and I stepped inside, watching my reflection in the polished walls. I looked the same as I had this morning. Same suit, same severe bun, same composed expression. But something fundamental had shifted. I'd stopped waiting for permission to matter. The following days were chaos. News of Andrew's suspension leaked within hours. It always does, and the tech press had a field day. Articles appeared with headlines like, "Vexel Solutions in Leadership Crisis," and "Meteoric CEO Andrew Briggs ousted after 6 months." Some were sympathetic to Andrew, painting him as a victim of corporate politics. Others dug deeper, finding patterns in his previous turnarounds. Companies he'd restructured by gutting experienced staff and loading up with consultants, then leaving before the consequences caught up with him. I gave one interview to a journalist I trusted and kept it simple. Andrew Briggs is a talented executive with a particular approach to leadership. Unfortunately, that approach wasn't aligned with Vexel's values or needs. We're grateful for his brief tenure and excited about our future direction. Professional. Diplomatic. Utterly bloodless. Behind the scenes, the real work began. I spent my first week as interim CEO meeting with every department head, every team lead, everyone Andrew had alienated or overlooked. I listened more than I spoke, taking notes on what was broken and how to fix it. The Helix project went back to my oversight. Within 2 weeks, we'd completed the final 6% and delivered to the client ahead of schedule. Their relief was palpable. They'd been watching our internal chaos with growing concern. I reinstated the project management structures Andrew had demolished, but refined them based on what we'd learned. Not everything he'd criticized was wrong. Some of our processes had grown bureaucratic with age. But his solution, chaos disguised as agility, wasn't the answer either. Emma got a promotion to senior technical architect. Colin Fletcher quietly resigned to pursue other opportunities, which everyone correctly understood meant left before he was pushed. The board conducted their search for a permanent CEO with impressive thoroughness. They interviewed external candidates, considered internal options, brought in executive recruiters who specialized in tech leadership. 3 months later, Catherine Wu appeared at my office door. "Got a minute?" she asked. "Always," I said, gesturing to the chairs by the window. She sat with the careful grace of someone who'd spent decades navigating corporate politics. "The board met this morning. We've completed our executive search." My stomach tightened. I'd known this was coming. Interim was never meant to be permanent. I'd accomplished what I set out to do. Stabilized the company, restored client confidence, rebuilt the teams Andrew had fractured. Walking away now would hurt, but I'd survive. "I hope you found someone good," I said, meaning it. Catherine smiled. "We did. Isabella, the board would like to offer you the permanent position as CEO of Vexel Solutions. Assuming you're still interested." The office seemed to tilt slightly. Are you sure? I'm not the typical. "No, you're not typical," Catherine interrupted. "You don't have an MBA from a fancy school. You didn't come up through traditional executive channels. You've never given a TED Talk or been profiled in Forbes as a leadership guru." She leaned forward, her expression intense. "What you have is something much rarer. You understand this company, not as an abstraction or a balance sheet, but as a living thing built by real people doing real work. You saved it when it was dying. You protected it when someone tried to tear it apart. And in 3 months as interim CEO, you've delivered stronger results than we've seen in years." "But I'm not," I struggled for words. "I'm not the inspiring speech type. I don't fit the image of what a CEO is supposed to be." "Good," Catherine said flatly. "We've tried that image. It nearly destroyed us twice. We want substance over performance. We want someone who leads by example rather than motivational posters. We want you." I looked out the window at the city below, thinking about the journey that had brought me here. The late nights and thankless projects. The inheritance I'd risked to save a company that hadn't even known my name. The quiet years of being invisible while others took bows. And finally, the moment I'd stopped waiting for someone else to see my value and demanded it myself. "Yes," I said, turning back to Catherine. "I accept." Her smile was genuine, reaching her eyes. "Then let's make it official." The announcement went out the next morning. Internal first, then to the press. The response was mixed. Some celebrated, particularly among the technical staff who'd worked with me for years. Others were skeptical. Investors who wanted a proven leader with name recognition, board watchers who questioned whether I had the gravitas for the role. I didn't engage with the skeptics. I just did the work. 6 months into my permanent tenure, we landed our largest client contract in company history. A multi-year deal with a Fortune 100 company that had been courting competitors. They chose us, the VP told me, because we demonstrated stability and technical excellence. "Honestly," he said during the contract signing, "we were going to go with someone else. But then your former CEO left and you stepped up and we watched how you handled it. That kind of grace under pressure? That's what we need in a partner. Grace under pressure." I'd never thought of it that way. To me, it had just been survival. A year after Andrew's suspension, I received an email from an unfamiliar address. Subject line, "Thank you." I almost deleted it, assuming spam, but something made me open it. "Ms. Rhodes, you don't know me. I worked at Andrew Briggs's previous company before he came to Vexel. I was one of the people he forced out. I've been following your story. What you did, standing up to him, exposing his pattern, it meant more than you know. He's done this before at multiple companies. Comes in, destroys what's working, blames the people he hurts, then moves on before the damage catches up. You stopped him. You created a public record that future boards can find. You made it harder for him to do to someone else what he did to you. I just wanted you to know that matters. You probably saved careers, maybe even lives. People who might have internalized his cruelty like I did, who might have believed his lies about their value. Thank you for being brave enough to fight back. I read it 3 times, feeling something warm and unexpected bloom in my chest. I'd fought for myself, for Vexel, for the 7 years I'd invested. I hadn't considered the wider implications, that standing up to one bully might protect others from becoming his next victims. I typed a brief response. Thank you for sharing this. I hope you found a place that values your contributions. No one deserves what he put us through. Late that evening, after most of the office had emptied, I stood in my office. The CEO's office now, with its ridiculous mahogany desk and commanding view. In the window's reflection, I could see the woman I'd become. Still not the image of a typical CEO. Still more comfortable in code than boardrooms. Still quiet when others would have been loud. But no longer invisible. No longer silent. No longer willing to let others define her worth. Emma found me there, 2 coffees in hand. She passed me one without asking. Thinking deep thoughts? She asked. Thinking about power, I said. How for years I believed it was something other people had. Something loud and performative and male. And now, I smiled. Now I know it's something else entirely. It's clarity. Conviction. The willingness to act when action is required, even when, especially when, it's terrifying. Emma raised her coffee cup in a toast. To terrifying actions. To terrifying actions, I echoed, and we drank. Below us, the city glittered in the darkness. Millions of lives, millions of stories, millions of battles being fought in boardrooms and cub